The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists with that familiar metallic sound I had heard thousands of times before. But this time was different. This time, I was not the one putting them on. I was watching from across the booking room as my coworkers processed the three criminals who had been terrorizing my neighborhood for months. The woman who called herself the HOA president looked up at me with pure hatred in her eyes. Her two fake police officer buddies stood beside her in orange jumpsuits, their phony badges now sitting in evidence bags. 6 months earlier, I thought I had found the perfect home. I was wrong. What I found instead was a criminal enterprise disguised as a homeowners association. They had been impersonating police officers, extorting money from families, and ruling through fear and intimidation. But they made one critical mistake. They targeted a corrections officer who knew exactly what real badges looked like and had friends in all the right places. Now, as I watched them get fingerprinted in the same jail where I work every single day, I could not help but smile. Justice has a beautiful sense of irony. My name is Marcus, and after 15 years working as a corrections officer at the county jail, I thought I had seen every kind of criminal that existed. I was about to discover a new breed that operated right in plain sight in suburban America. But let me start from the beginning, when life was still simple, and I believed that buying a house in Pine Valley Estates would be the best decision I ever made. The house was everything my wife Sarah and I had dreamed of. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a 2-car garage, and a yard big enough for our kids to play safely. The neighborhood looked like something from a magazine, with perfectly manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, and streets so clean you could eat off the pavement. We signed the papers on a Friday afternoon in March, and by Sunday, we were moving our furniture into what we thought would be our forever home. The first few weeks were blissful. Our neighbors seemed friendly enough, waving from their driveways and offering recommendations for local services. The kids loved their new school, and Sarah was already planning a garden for the backyard. I remember thinking that after years of living paycheck to paycheck, we had finally made it to the middle-class dream that everyone talks about but few actually achieve. Then the letters started arriving. The first one came on a Tuesday morning, stuck under our front door while we were at work. It was printed on official-looking letterhead that read Pine Valley Estates Homeowners Association in bold letters across the top. The message was short but stern. Our trash cans had been left at the curb for more than 12 hours after pickup, which violated Section 4.7 of the community guidelines. A $50 fine would be added to our monthly dues if the violation occurred again. I read the letter twice, then showed it to Sarah when she got home from her nursing shift. We both laughed it off as overzealous neighborhood management. After all, we had forgotten to bring the cans in after work one day. It seemed like a reasonable request, even if the tone was a bit harsh. We had no idea this was just the beginning of what would become a systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation. The second letter arrived 3 days later. This time, it was about our lawn height. Apparently, the grass was 1/4 inch too tall according to the community standards. Another $50 fine. The third letter complained about a small decorative flag we had hung by our front door to welcome guests. Unauthorized decorations were strictly forbidden without written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. By the end of our first month in Pine Valley Estates, we had received 7 violation notices and accumulated $350 in fines. But more concerning than the money was the feeling that we were being watched constantly. Someone was monitoring our every move, measuring our grass, timing our trash can placement, and documenting every tiny detail of how we maintained our property. That was when I first met Karen Mitchell, the self-appointed president of the Pine Valley Estates Homeowners Association. She arrived at our front door on a Saturday morning, flanked by two large men wearing what looked like security uniforms. Karen was a woman in her late 50s with short gray hair and the kind of stern expression that suggested she had never smiled in her entire life. She introduced herself as the community leader responsible for maintaining property values and neighborhood standards. The two men with her never spoke, but their presence was clearly meant to intimidate. They stood slightly behind Karen, arms crossed, wearing dark sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. Something about them made my law enforcement instincts start tingling, but I could not quite put my finger on what was wrong with the picture they presented. Over the next few weeks, Karen and her enforcers became regular visitors to our property. They would show up unannounced, walking around our yard with clipboards and cameras, documenting every perceived violation of their ever-expanding list of rules. The men had started wearing official-looking badges pinned to their shirts, and they carried themselves with the kind of authority that comes from wearing a uniform. The demands became increasingly unreasonable. Karen informed us that our front door needed to be repainted a specific shade of beige that was approved by the architectural committee. The cost would be $400, plus a $50 application fee to request permission for the work. Our mailbox was the wrong style and needed to be replaced with a model that matched the community standards. Another $300. She also decided that our landscaping was inadequate for the neighborhood. The small rose bushes we had planted needed to be removed and replaced with approved shrubs that would cost over $1,000 to purchase and install. When I asked to see the official HOA documents that outlined these requirements, Karen became evasive and hostile. The two men with her started speaking up during these visits, and that was when I began to notice serious red flags. They would refer to themselves as enforcement officers and claim to have the authority to issue citations for HOA violations. One of them, a heavy-set man with a thick mustache, told me that failure to comply with community standards could result in legal action and even arrest. The badges they wore looked official at first glance, but my 15 years in law enforcement had taught me to spot fake credentials. The metal was too shiny, the lettering was slightly off, and the overall design did not match any legitimate law enforcement agency I had ever seen. When I casually asked which department they worked for, they gave vague answers about being specially commissioned for HOA enforcement. My suspicions were confirmed when I ran into my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, at the grocery store. She was an elderly widow who had lived in Pine Valley Estates for over 10 years, long before the current HOA took control. With tears in her eyes, she told me about the harassment she had been enduring from Karen and her fake police officers. They had demanded that she remove a small memorial garden she had created for her late husband, claiming it violated the landscaping standards. When she refused, they began showing up at her house multiple times per week, walking around her property and taking pictures. The stress had been so overwhelming that she was considering selling her home and moving in with her daughter in another state. Mrs. Peterson was not the only victim. As I started talking to other neighbors, a pattern of systematic harassment emerged. Karen and her enforcers were targeting anyone who questioned their authority or failed to comply immediately with their demands. They had perfected a system of intimidation that combined official-looking documentation with the implied threat of law enforcement action. The breaking point came when they demanded access to the inside of our house for a compliance inspection. Karen claimed that the HOA had the right to verify that our interior modifications met community standards, even though we had not made any changes to the house since moving in. When I refused to let them inside, the two fake officers stepped forward, and one of them put his hand on what looked like a police radio attached to his belt. "Sir, we have the legal authority to conduct this inspection," he said in a tone that was clearly meant to intimidate. Failure to comply could result in immediate citations and possible arrest for obstruction of official duties. That was the moment I knew for certain that these people were not just overzealous HOA members. They were criminals impersonating law enforcement officers, and they were using that fake authority to extort money and terrorize an entire neighborhood. The question was no longer whether they were breaking the law. The question was how to gather enough evidence to put them behind bars where they belonged. I spent that evening researching HOA laws and regulations for our county. What I discovered was shocking. Pine Valley Estates had never been properly established as a legitimate homeowners association. The documents Karen claimed gave her authority were either forged or completely fabricated. The entire organization was nothing more than an elaborate criminal enterprise designed to extract money from homeowners through fear and intimidation. My law enforcement training kicked into high gear the next morning. I had worked with enough detectives over the years to know that building a solid case requires methodical evidence collection and careful documentation. If I was going to take down this criminal operation, I needed to do it right the first time. My first call was to Detective Rodriguez at the county sheriff's office. Tony and I had worked together on several cases involving inmates who had been arrested for various fraud schemes. I explained the situation in Pine Valley Estates, and his response was immediate and serious. Impersonating a police officer is a felony in our state, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. If Karen and her accomplices were also involved in extortion and fraud, they were looking at even more serious charges. Tony agreed to help me verify the credentials and background of the two men posing as enforcement officers. Within 24 hours, he had confirmed what I already suspected. Neither man had any connection to legitimate law enforcement. Their names did not appear in any police database, and the badges they wore were cheap replicas that could be purchased online for less than $20 each. The fake radio equipment they carried was equally fraudulent. Real police radios are programmed with specific frequencies and require proper licensing to operate. The devices Karen's enforcers carried were nothing more than consumer-grade walkie-talkies dressed up to look official. Everything about their operation was designed to fool people who had no experience with real law enforcement. While Tony worked on the criminal background investigation, I focused on gathering evidence of the HOA fraud. I drove to the county courthouse and spent an entire afternoon searching through public records. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. Pine Valley Estates had never filed the proper paperwork to establish a legitimate homeowners association. There were no bylaws on record, no elected board of directors, and no legal authority for anyone to collect fees or enforce property standards. Karen Mitchell's name appeared in the records as the original developer of the subdivision, but her company had gone bankrupt 3 years earlier. Somehow, she had managed to convince new homeowners that she still had authority over the community, and she had been collecting monthly dues and fines without any legal right to do so. The entire HOA was nothing more than an elaborate con game. Armed with this information, I began setting up surveillance of their operations. I installed discrete security cameras around my property to document their trespassing and harassment. The footage I captured over the next 2 weeks was damning. Karen and her fake officers were caught on video walking through private yards without permission, taking pictures of residents' homes, and conducting what they called compliance inspections that had no legal foundation. The most incriminating evidence came when I recorded them interacting with other neighbors. In one particularly disturbing incident, they approached an elderly man who was working in his garden and demanded to see his landscaping permits. When he asked what authority they had to make such demands, one of the fake officers placed his hand on his phony badge and said, "We are authorized law enforcement officers for this community. You need to comply with our investigation or face arrest for obstruction." I also gathered financial records that showed the extent of their fraud. Karen had been collecting monthly HOA dues of $75 from every household in the subdivision. With over 200 homes in Pine Valley Estates, she was taking in more than $15,000 per month in illegitimate fees. The violation fines added thousands more to her income. Over the 3 years since her development company went bankrupt, she had stolen well over $500,000 from unsuspecting homeowners. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed one more piece to guarantee successful prosecution. I contacted the district attorney's office and spoke with prosecutor Janet Williams, who specialized in fraud and impersonation cases. After reviewing the evidence I had gathered, she was eager to move forward with charges, but she wanted to catch them in the act of impersonating officers in a controlled situation where there would be no question about their criminal intent. Together, we developed a plan to create the perfect trap. I would intentionally violate one of their bogus HOA rules in a way that would force them to respond with their fake law enforcement routine. Janet would coordinate with real police officers who would be positioned nearby to witness the impersonation and make arrests at the exact moment the crime was committed. The plan was simple but effective. All I had to do was give them enough rope to hang themselves, and my 15 years of experience in the criminal justice system told me that criminals like Karen and her accomplices could never resist the opportunity to abuse their fake authority one more time. Planning the operation felt like preparing for a military strike. Every detail had to be perfect because we would only get one chance to catch these criminals in the act. District Attorney Janet Williams worked with Sheriff Captain Morrison to coordinate the law enforcement response, while I focused on creating the perfect scenario to draw Karen and her fake officers into our trap. The bait was simple but irresistible to someone obsessed with controlling every aspect of neighborhood appearance. I purchased a large decorative garden gnome and placed it prominently in my front yard, right next to the sidewalk where it would be impossible to miss. According to the fabricated HOA rules that Karen had been enforcing, lawn ornaments required written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. I knew that my unauthorized gnome would trigger an immediate response from her enforcement team. While we waited for them to take the bait, real police officers took positions around my neighborhood. Detective Rodriguez parked his unmarked car 2 blocks away with a clear view of my house through binoculars. 2 patrol officers positioned themselves in the grocery store parking lot across the street, ready to move in at a moment's notice. A 3rd officer waited in the community center parking lot behind my house, covering any potential escape routes. The surveillance setup was equally thorough. In addition to my existing security cameras, Detective Rodriguez provided professional recording equipment that would capture both video and audio evidence of the impersonation. Every word spoken by Karen and her accomplices would be documented with the kind of clarity that prosecutors love to present to juries. Janet Williams coached me on exactly how to handle the confrontation when it occurred. I needed to ask direct questions about their law enforcement authority and give them multiple opportunities to claim they were real police officers. The more explicit their false claims, the stronger the criminal case would become. She also warned me to stay calm no matter how aggressive they became, because any physical altercation could complicate the prosecution. The psychological preparation was almost as important as the technical setup. I had dealt with dangerous criminals in my job at the county jail, but this situation was different. These people had been terrorizing my family and neighbors for months. They had stolen thousands of dollars from hardworking people and used fear tactics to maintain their criminal enterprise. Part of me wanted to handle this situation the way we might deal with troublemakers in prison, but I knew that following proper legal procedures was the only way to ensure they faced real consequences for their crimes. Sarah was nervous about the whole operation, which was completely understandable. She worried that confronting these criminals might put our family in danger, especially if they became violent when they realized they had been caught. I assured her that trained police officers would be watching every moment of the encounter, and that the element of surprise would work in our favor. Karen and her accomplices had no idea they were walking into a trap. 2 days after placing the garden gnome in my yard, I received the phone call I had been expecting. Karen's voice was cold and authoritative as she informed me that an unauthorized decoration had been observed on my property. She and her enforcement team would be conducting an inspection the following morning at 10 o'clock sharp. Failure to remove the violation before their arrival would result in immediate fines and possible legal action. The morning of the operation arrived with perfect weather. Clear skies and light wind would provide ideal conditions for surveillance and recording. I checked and rechecked all the camera equipment, tested the audio recording devices, and confirmed that Detective Rodriguez and his team were in position. Every officer involved in the operation understood their role and the timing of the arrest. At exactly 9:55, I watched through my front window as Karen's black SUV pulled into my driveway. She emerged from the driver's seat wearing a dark blazer and carrying a clipboard, looking every inch the officious bureaucrat she pretended to be. Her two accomplices got out of the passenger side, and I could see they were wearing their full fake police uniforms complete with badges, utility belts, and what appeared to be handcuffs. My heart was pounding as I walked to the front door, but my hands were steady. After 15 years of dealing with criminals, I knew how to project calm confidence even when adrenaline was coursing through my system. The moment of truth had arrived, and I was ready to watch these predators finally face the consequences of their actions. Everything was in place. The cameras were rolling, the real police were watching, and the criminals were about to commit their crimes right in front of everyone who mattered. Justice was about to be served with a side of beautiful irony. The knock on my front door came at exactly 10 o'clock, just as Karen had promised. I could see all three of them through the peephole, standing in a formation clearly designed to intimidate. Karen positioned herself directly in front of the door while her two fake officers flanked her on either side, their hands resting on their utility belts like real cops preparing for a potentially dangerous encounter. I opened the door with a calm smile and greeted them as if they were welcome guests. "Good morning, Karen. What can I do for you today?" Her response was immediate and hostile. "Mr. Johnson, you have placed an unauthorized decoration on your property in direct violation of Pine Valley Estate's community standards. This is an official compliance inspection, and we need to document the violation for our records." The first fake officer stepped forward and pulled out a small notebook, exactly the way a real police officer might during a routine investigation. "Sir, we are going to need you to step outside while we conduct our inspection of the violation." I could see Detective Rodriguez's car in my peripheral vision, positioned perfectly to record everything that was about to happen. The real police officers were in position, and the surveillance equipment was capturing every word and gesture. Now, I just needed to give these criminals enough rope to hang themselves. "I appreciate you coming by," I said politely, "but I would like to see some identification before we proceed. Can you show me your credentials?" The second fake officer immediately reached for his badge and held it up for me to see. "We are certified enforcement officers for the Pine Valley Estates Homeowners Association. We have full authority to investigate violations and issue citations." I stepped closer and pretended to examine his badge carefully. The cheap metal and poor craftsmanship were obvious up close, but I played along with their charade. "This looks official, but I am not familiar with HOA enforcement officers. Are you commissioned police officers?" That was the question Janet Williams had coached me to ask. If they claimed to be real police officers while wearing fake badges and uniforms, they would be committing a clear felony that could not be explained away or minimized during prosecution. The first fake officer puffed out his chest and spoke with the kind of authority that only comes from wearing a uniform. "Yes, sir. We are commissioned law enforcement officers with full police powers within this community. We have the authority to detain, arrest, and prosecute anyone who interferes with our official duties." Karen nodded in agreement and stepped forward with her clipboard. "These officers are specially trained in HOA law enforcement. They work directly with the sheriff's department to ensure compliance with community standards." I could hardly believe they were making it this easy. Not only were they claiming to be real police officers, but they were also claiming an official relationship with the sheriff's department that Detective Rodriguez could immediately contradict. Every word they spoke was digging their legal grave deeper. "I understand," I said calmly. "Since you are real police officers, I assume you carry proper identification and credentials from the sheriff's department. Can I see your official police ID cards?" The second fake officer reached into his wallet and pulled out what appeared to be an identification card. When he handed it to me, I could see immediately that it was a poorly made fake. The photograph was crooked. The text was printed on regular paper instead of official card stock, and the holographic security features that appear on real police IDs were completely absent. "This does not look like official police identification," I said, handing the card back to him. "Are you sure you are authorized to represent yourself as law enforcement officers?" Both fake officers became visibly agitated. The first one put his hand on what appeared to be handcuffs attached to his belt and spoke in a threatening tone. "Sir, you are interfering with an official police investigation. If you continue to obstruct our duties, we will be forced to place you under arrest." Karen stepped between us and tried to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Johnson, these officers have full legal authority in this community. I suggest you cooperate with their investigation before this situation escalates further." That was the moment I had been waiting for. They had committed multiple felonies right in front of the surveillance cameras and within sight of real police officers. Janet Williams would have more than enough evidence to prosecute them for impersonating police officers, fraud, and attempted extortion. I looked directly at the first fake officer and asked the final question that would seal their fate. "Officer, are you telling me that you are a commissioned law enforcement officer with the power to arrest me?" He straightened his fake uniform and looked me directly in the eyes. "Yes, sir. I am a sworn police officer, and you are currently interfering with an official investigation. You have 10 seconds to step aside and allow us to complete our inspection, or you will be placed under arrest for obstruction of justice." The irony was perfect. He was threatening to arrest me for obstruction of justice while he was actively committing multiple felonies. But his criminal career was about to come to an abrupt end. Detective Rodriguez and 2 patrol officers emerged from their concealment positions with weapons drawn and police badges clearly visible. "Nobody move. This is the sheriff's department." The expressions on their faces when they realized they had been caught was absolutely priceless. Karen's mouth fell open in shock, while her two accomplices looked around frantically, as if searching for an escape route that did not exist. The fake authority and confidence they had projected moments earlier evaporated instantly. "You are all under arrest for impersonating police officers," Detective Rodriguez announced as he approached with handcuffs ready. "You have the right to remain silent." The booking process at the county jail was everything I had hoped it would be. As a corrections officer who had processed thousands of inmates over the years, I knew exactly what Karen and her accomplices were experiencing as they were photographed, fingerprinted, and assigned their inmate numbers. The difference was that this time, I was watching from the other side of the booking room as my coworkers handled the paperwork. The irony was not lost on anyone in the facility. Officer Martinez, who had worked with me for over a decade, could not stop smiling as he processed the fake police officers. "Marcus, I have to say, this is the most satisfying booking I have done all year. These idiots tried to impersonate cops in front of a real cop who works in the same building where they are getting booked." The criminal background checks revealed information that made their crimes even more disturbing. Karen Mitchell had 2 previous convictions for fraud and had spent 18 months in state prison for running a fake charity scam. Her first accomplice had been arrested multiple times for theft and burglary, while the second fake officer had a history of domestic violence and assault charges. These were not desperate people who had fallen into crime due to circumstances beyond their control. They were career criminals who had specifically targeted Pine Valley estates because they thought suburban homeowners would be easy victims who would not fight back against their intimidation tactics. District Attorney Janet Williams moved quickly to file formal charges. Karen faced multiple felony counts including fraud, extortion, impersonating a public official, and conspiracy. Each of her accomplices was charged with impersonating a police officer, which carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 2 years in state prison. Additional charges were being considered as more victims came forward with evidence of harassment and financial theft. The local news media picked up the story within hours of the arrests. Channel 7 ran a detailed report about the fake HOA scheme that had been operating in Pine Valley estates, and the story quickly went viral on social media. The reporter interviewed several neighbors who shared their experiences with Karen's criminal organization, and the public response was overwhelmingly supportive of the law enforcement action. More importantly, the media coverage served as a warning to other communities about similar scams. Within a week of the story breaking, police departments in 3 neighboring counties reported that residents had called to report suspicious HOA enforcement activities in their neighborhoods. The publicity generated by our case helped protect other potential victims from falling prey to the same type of criminal enterprise. The financial investigation revealed the full scope of Karen's fraud. Over the 3 years since she had started her fake HOA operation, she had collected more than $600,000 in illegitimate fees and fines from Pine Valley estates residents. The money had been deposited into personal bank accounts that she controlled, with no oversight or accountability to the community she claimed to represent. The district attorney's office moved to freeze all of Karen's assets and began the process of returning stolen money to the victims. Every homeowner who had paid HOA dues or violation fines would eventually receive a full refund, plus interest and compensation for the emotional distress they had suffered. As the legal proceedings moved forward, the transformation in Pine Valley estates was remarkable. Neighbors who had been living in fear of Karen's enforcement team suddenly felt free to express their personalities through their homes and yards. Children could play outside without worrying about violating arbitrary rules, and families could enjoy their properties without constant surveillance and harassment. Property values actually increased after the fake HOA was eliminated. Potential buyers who had been scared away by the reputation of an overly restrictive community began showing interest in homes for sale in the neighborhood. The criminal organization that Karen thought would protect property values had actually been damaging them through excessive regulation and negative publicity. The community came together in ways that a legitimate HOA never could have achieved. Neighbors organized voluntary cleanup days, shared resources for home maintenance projects, and looked out for each other's safety and well-being. Without the artificial authority structure that Karen had imposed, Pine Valley Estates became the kind of close-knit community that most people dream of living in. The courtroom was packed with Pine Valley Estates residents on the day of sentencing. After pleading guilty to avoid a lengthy trial, Karen Mitchell stood before Judge Harrison to face the consequences of her crimes. The judge had read the victim impact statements from dozens of families who had been terrorized by her fake HOA operation, and his expression made it clear that he was not inclined toward leniency. "Miss Mitchell," Judge Harrison said sternly, "you have systematically preyed upon hardworking families who trusted you to act in their best interests. Instead, you created an atmosphere of fear and intimidation while stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars. This court sentences you to 7 years in state prison, with restitution to be paid in full to your victims." Her 2 accomplices received 5-year sentences for their roles in the impersonation scheme. As they were led away in handcuffs, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that justice had been served not just for my family, but for every neighbor who had suffered under their criminal regime. The legal victory was just the beginning of positive changes in Pine Valley Estates. Without the threat of arbitrary fines and harassment, homeowners began investing in improvements that reflected their personal tastes and needs. Gardens bloomed with flowers that had been forbidden under Karen's fake rules. Children's toys appeared in yards where they had been banned as violations of community standards. The neighborhood also became a model for how communities can protect themselves from similar scams. I worked with the sheriff's department to create an educational program that teaches residents how to verify the legitimacy of HOA organizations and recognize the signs of impersonation fraud. The program has been presented to over 50 neighborhoods throughout the county, helping prevent other families from becoming victims. Property values in Pine Valley Estates increased by 12% in the year following Karen's arrest. Real estate agents began marketing homes in our neighborhood as being located in a liberated community, where residents enjoyed freedom from HOA oppression. The criminal organization that was supposed to protect our investments had actually been destroying them through excessive control and negative publicity. My own family thrived in the new environment. Sarah was able to plant the garden she had always wanted, complete with vegetables and herbs that had been prohibited under the fake HOA rules. Our children could ride their bicycles and play games in the street without fear of generating violation notices. Most importantly, we could finally enjoy the home we had worked so hard to purchase. The experience taught me valuable lessons about the importance of standing up to bullies, even when they appear to have official authority. My background in law enforcement gave me advantages that most homeowners would not have, but the principles apply to anyone facing similar intimidation. Research the claims being made, document everything, and never be afraid to ask for help from legitimate authorities. Other communities have reached out for advice on handling suspicious HOA activities, and I always tell them the same thing. Real authority comes with real accountability. If someone claims to have power over your property or your family, they should be able to prove that authority with legitimate documentation and proper credentials. Pine Valley Estates is now the community we thought we were buying into 3 years ago. Neighbors genuinely care about each other, property values are strong, and families can enjoy their homes without fear of harassment. Sometimes the best way to build a better community is to remove the people who are destroying it from within.